What's up, everyone? Huge thanks for helping me hit 100 subs. It's a small number, but it means the world to me. To celebrate, here's a story from Spades Writes, the first author I reached out to on Reddit. He gave me a shot and encouraged me to keep going. Big thanks to them and all of you. So what do you say? Shall we dive into today's creepy tale? For as long as I could remember, I'd been drawn to places the world left behind. Abandoned factories, forgotten amusement parks, crumbling houses. Exploring them wasn't just a hobby. It was an obsession, a way to feel alive. Jake had been my partner in it all. In high school, we'd sneak into boarded-up buildings with flashlights and a sense of invincibility. His laugh echoed through empty halls, making even the creepiest places feel like an adventure. But after the accident, a rainy night, a sharp curve, he was gone. At first, I kept exploring for him, but soon it became a habit, a need to find places the world forgot. Quiet, lifeless places where time seemed to stop. That's when I came across Evergreen Mall. The mall thrived in the 80s and 90s as a beacon of community. Families weaved through storefronts. Kids darted between the arcade and food court. But the decline came fast and brutal. The economy crashed, and then the tragedies turned Evergreen Mall into a ghost story. First, Naomi, a 7-year-old girl, vanished in the arcade. Security footage showed her darting between machines before stepping off-screen and disappearing forever. Rumors spread, kidnappings, foul play, but no one could explain how a child could simply cease to exist. Months later, Elijah Carter died in a freak escalator accident. A loose panel gave way, and he fell through, disappearing beneath the gears. Witnesses said his screams echoed through the atrium, haunting those who heard them. That was the final straw. Stores shuttered, families stopped coming, and Evergreen Mall became a decaying husk. I'd first heard of Evergreen on urban exploration forums. Photos showed moss-covered tiles and shattered windows, the usual decay, but buried in the comments were uneasy whispers, shadows moving in the arcade, lights flickering with no power, faint screams no one could explain. To me, it wasn't just another explorer's dream. It was a graveyard of stories waiting to be uncovered. I didn't believe in ghosts, but memories. Memories could haunt a place, and maybe, just maybe, there was something more. For the first time in years, I felt that thrill again, a call I couldn't ignore. I had to see it for myself. I packed my gear, snacks, water, a flashlight, and my trusty pocket knife. This time, I added bolt cutters and my dad's old revolver, more for peace of mind than anything else. I'd read enough to know that not all dangers in these places were supernatural. The 2-hour drive gave me plenty of time to imagine what I'd find. Jake's laugh echoed in my head, daring me to climb higher and go further. By the time I arrived, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. Nature had begun reclaiming Evergreen Mall. Weeds pushed through the asphalt in defiant clumps, frost crunching under my boots as I stepped out of the car. Ivy crept up the building like green veins, twisting into broken windows and crumbling brick. The vast parking lot was empty, save for rusted debris and untouched snow. I popped the trunk and grabbed my gear, bolt cutters, a flashlight, a camera, and my bag. I tightened the straps across my shoulders and locked the car with a faint sense of finality. 2 towering pine trees, the mall's namesake, flanked the main entrance, though only one remained whole. The tree on the left had been struck by lightning long ago. Its bark was scorched black, and its trunk split. The splintered branches sprawled across the entrance, partially blocking it. The doors had been barricaded once, but the boards now lay rotting on the ground. Shards of glass glittered faintly, like jagged snowflakes in the dim light. I tightened my grip on my bag, ducking carefully under the twisted branches and stepping through the shattered entrance. The mall greeted me with silence. It was a cathedral of decay. Trash and debris littered the floor, graffiti covered the walls, and the air was thick with mildew and rot. Yet, for all its disrepair, the place felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me. I paused in the atrium, tilting my head back to take in the shattered glass ceiling. Sunlight filtered through the broken panes, casting fragmented beams across the crumbling tiles. It gave the space an otherworldly glow, as if the mall existed halfway between this world and the next. For a moment, I thought I could hear echoes of what it had once been, the laughter of children, the hum of conversation, the jingles of forgotten stores. "Welcome to Evergreen Mall." Cartoon pine trees flanked the words on the giant sign, their wide-eyed smiles frozen in time. Someone had defaced one of them, drawing a crude sketch over its face. I shook my head. Jake and I had always hated when people vandalized places like this. Exploring was about respecting their history, not destroying it. I pulled out my camera and snapped my first photo. The shutter click echoed faintly in the vast emptiness. Adjusting my bag, I began to explore. I wandered through the atrium, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the cavernous silence. Time had ravaged the mall, but every corner told a story. Shops frozen in their last moments, a surreal snapshot of a world long gone. The first store was a sporting goods shop. Shattered windows revealed shelves of deflated basketballs, rusted dumbbells, and cracked trophies. I snapped a photo, the stale air thick with dust and mildew. Next was the pet shop. I imagined kids once pressing their faces to the glass, gawking at colorful fish, or begging for a puppy. Now the tanks were cracked, the walls streaked with grime, but it was the floor that stopped me. It writhed. Thousands of cockroaches scattered as my flashlight swept over them, slick bodies vanishing into the shadows. My stomach turned, and I backed away. Further in, the Macy's loomed, a monolith of decay. Displays lay toppled, clothing racks stripped bare. The escalator caught my eye, its frozen steps leading upward. I hesitated, shining my light. The beam revealed dozens of mannequins huddled on the upper floor like a silent congregation. I climbed the escalator. At the top, the mannequins came into focus, chipped, missing limbs arranged as if someone had been playing with them. One stood in a corner, its head turned to the wall, like it was ashamed. A shiver crawled up my spine. At the bottom of the escalator, I glanced back. I thought one had moved for a split second, but it was still when I looked closer. I hurried on, rounding the corner into the kid zone. Slides and tunnels stretched ahead. Their once bright colors faded to a dull gray. The air was heavy with a musty staleness that clung to my throat. Above me, the kid zone sign hung lopsided, swaying faintly. I froze. For a moment I thought I heard laughter. Soft, distant, but it vanished as quickly as it came. I shook it off and moved deeper into the mall. The food court sprawled out like a graveyard. Chairs were overturned, tables shattered, and the greasy tang of ancient fryers still lingered in the air. Faded signs for Pizza Palace and Burger Barn barely clung to the walls. In the center, a carousel stood still and skeletal, its stripped poles jutting like broken bones. I paused, uneasy, imagining it turning, kids screaming with joy, music echoing through the emptiness. I hurried past, the silence pressing in harder now, and then I saw it. The arcade, the faded imprint of Galactic Games, loomed over the entrance. The letters were long gone, but their shadows stubbornly etched into the grime, like the building itself refused to forget. As I stepped closer, the air felt heavier and stiller, as though the mall were holding its breath, waiting. My unease deepened. Something about this place felt wrong, but curiosity, that old familiar itch, pushed me forward. With a deep breath, I stepped inside. My flashlight flickered as I turned a corner in the arcade, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement. Small, quick, like a child darting between the machines. My heart jumped, and I swung the beam toward the spot. Nothing, just a mannequin propped awkwardly against a Defender cabinet. The mannequin's face was different from the others I'd seen. Its features were crudely painted on, and its head tilted slightly to one side. It looked like it had been crying, the streaks of black paint running down its cheeks unsettlingly lifelike. Behind it, scrawled in faded red graffiti, were the words, "What has Naomi gotten herself into?" A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the missing girl. Naomi Grant, 7 years old, last seen in this very arcade before vanishing without a trace. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped closer and noticed a newspaper clipping taped to the side of the Defender machine. It was yellowed and brittle, but the headline was still legible. "Child disappears at Evergreen Mall." I froze, staring at the mannequin. The crude features, the streaks of black paint. Who was sick enough to set this up? My flashlight flickered slightly, the beam catching on the newspaper clipping taped to the machine. I backed away slowly, my footsteps muffled in the thick silence. I turned toward the exit, letting the arcade disappear behind me as quickly as it had appeared. The next thing that caught my eye was the movie theater. Its facade stood out like a relic of better days. It was designed to mimic an old-fashioned cinema, complete with a white marquee billboard and bold black lettering. I hesitated, the arcade still lingering at the edges of my thoughts, but the theater pulled me in. The concession stand was faded but mostly intact. Empty candy boxes lined the counters, and rusted popcorn machines sat forgotten. It stirred bittersweet nostalgia. My first date in a theater like this. Sweaty palms and stolen glances. Time had turned that memory into something untouchable, wrapped in dust like everything else here. I pushed further inside. The narrow halls led to 4 screening rooms, each in worse shape than the last. Torn seats, cracked screens, and littered floors. My flashlight caught movement in one theater, a rat darting from beneath the upholstery, its claws scraping the floor. I shivered. The final screening room was the worst. Rows of broken seats stretched into darkness, eerily symmetrical, but it was the screen that stopped me. Red spray paint marred the center, the words clear and crude. Some doors should remain closed. My heart raced as I snapped a photo, the flash slicing through the gloom. The room felt mournful, as though the walls grieved stories that would never be told again. I backed out quickly, unease prickling up my skin. When I returned to the main hall, dusk had set in. The fading sunlight filtered through the shattered ceiling, casting jagged shadows that stretched across the ruins. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. My curiosity burned stronger than my fear. That's when I spotted it. A door marked "Employees Only." Perfect, I thought to myself. The faded letters were peeling, but the door was sturdy and stubborn as I pushed against it. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing unnervingly down the corridor beyond. The moment I stepped through, I felt it. This space was different. The air was heavy, the temperature noticeably colder. Pipes ran along the walls, their surfaces slick with condensation that caught my flashlight beam. The faint hum of wind whispered through the passage, and my footsteps hit the floor with a hollow, too loud thud. At the end of the corridor, I stumbled upon another door. This one was unlike any I'd seen before. It was pristine, untouched by time or decay. Painted bright yellow, the words "Do not enter" were emblazoned across it in bold, almost glowing letters. My heart skipped a beat. The door felt out of place, as if it didn't belong to the same reality as the rest of the mall. Something about it screamed danger, yet my curiosity overpowered any sense of caution. The door was chained shut, but I didn't hesitate. I swung my bolt cutters, the metal snap breaking the silence like a gunshot. The chain fell to the floor with a dull clatter, the sound echoing down the corridor like a warning. I gripped the handle, took a steadying breath, and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest. A slow, echoing creak filled the corridor, cutting through the silence like a knife. It led to a staircase. The sight stopped me cold. The stairs were pristine, almost unnervingly so, clean, gleaming marble, unlike the rest of the decaying mall. A dim yellow light bathed the steps in a dull glow, but there was no apparent source. The air was heavy and stale, pressing against me like I'd stepped into something that wasn't meant for humans. I stepped inside completely, my shoes clicking faintly on the marble. The room was featureless, the walls impossibly smooth and free of grime. I glanced around, trying to understand what I was looking at and where the stairs led. A parking garage, some forgotten basement. That had to be it. Pulling out my camera, I framed the bottom of the staircase in my viewfinder. I adjusted the focus and snapped a photo. My heart stopped. A mannequin stood at the base of the stairs, its head tilted upward, staring directly at me. I froze, lowering the camera. The bottom of the stairs was empty. My breath caught in my throat as I backed up instinctively, keeping my eyes fixed on where the mannequin had been. I bumped against something solid. Spinning around, I expected to see the door, only to find a seamless wall. Panic set in. I pressed my hands against it, searching for the seam, for any hint of the door I'd just come through. Nothing. The wall was ice cold beneath my palms, sending chills up my arms. A sudden snap of frigid air crawled over my skin like frostbite, making my chest seize. I turned back to the staircase. I don't know why I did it. Maybe instinct, maybe dread. But I raised my camera again and looked through the lens. It wasn't at the bottom of the stairs anymore. I turned, and it was there. The mannequin stood silently in the far corner of the room. My gasp echoed through the empty space. The camera slipped from my hands, cracking sharply against the floor. I didn't think. I didn't question. I bolted down the stairs. The first few flights passed in a blur, my footsteps echoing against the marble. I wasn't thinking. I was moving, away from whatever was behind me. After what felt like forever, I stopped, gasping for air. I turned to look back up the steps. The yellow glow above had faded into darkness, and the stairs had changed when I turned my gaze downward. The marble was gone, replaced by a narrow carpeted staircase that didn't belong. It looked wrong, like something ripped straight from a forgotten suburban home. The carpet was dull, beige, stained, and frayed as if worn down by countless feet for years. The air smelled faintly musty, like an attic no one had touched in decades. The light dimmed, and the yellow glow smothered into near darkness. My heart stuttered, and instinct took over. I fumbled in my bag, shaking my fingers, and pulled out my flashlight. The harsh and focused beam flickered to life, cutting through the gloom. I glanced at the walls. Framed portraits hung in perfect intervals. But something was off. My flashlight beam caught the edges of the frames, the glass foggy and cracked. The faces inside, families, I assumed, were blurred and smeared, featureless shadows of what they should have been. It was as though someone had tried to erase them, but failed. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. "This doesn't make any sense," I whispered, my voice small and shaky. "What the hell is this place?" The silence answered me, heavy and oppressive. My hand trembled as I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam unsteady. I turned back toward the steps below, forcing myself to keep moving. But as I shifted, I saw my shadow on the wall. It looked wrong. The dark shape twisted unnaturally, jerking and contorting as if it were moving on its own. It didn't follow the rhythm of my steps. It didn't even match the beam of my flashlight. My breath caught in my throat, my pulse hammering in my ears. It was mocking me. A sound rose from somewhere above. It started faint, almost too subtle to notice. A soft rhythmic clicking, like nails tapping against stone. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing on end. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything but the sound. The clicking grew louder, sharper, with an unnatural cadence that seemed to crawl under my skin. I turned my flashlight upward, my hands trembling. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty steps. Yet the sound remained, closer now, too close. Panic set in. I stumbled back a step, my foot catching awkwardly on the edge of a stair. I barely managed to keep my balance. My thoughts screamed at me to move, but my legs felt heavy, frozen by the oppressive stillness pressing down from above. And then, without warning, the clicking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. "Time to go," I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white, and began to descend the stairs again, faster this time. The rhythmic thud of my footsteps was the only sound, but the dread coiled tighter in my chest, growing heavier with every step. After a dozen more flights, I collapsed onto one of the steps. My legs burned, my chest ached, and I felt disoriented and untethered. I unscrewed my water bottle cap, took a sip, and forced myself to think clearly. "Where the hell am I?" I whispered. None of this made sense. I pressed my palm against the wall beside me. It felt wrong, smooth and solid but hollow when I knocked on it, as something lay just behind the surface. I scraped at the wall with my knife, the sound sharp and grating, but the surface refused to give way. It was as though something beneath it resisted me. Then, the cold returned. It crept over my skin in a sudden wave, sharper than before, bitter and unnatural. My breaths turned shallow, each one fogging faintly in the air. And then I heard it. "What you doing?" The voice came out of nowhere. I dropped my knife in shock, my pulse spiking as I spun around, pressing my back against the wall. Standing a flight above me was a little girl. Her skin was pale, her dark hair hanging limp and damp around her face. She wore a faded yellow dress, stained at the hem, and her bare feet looked dirty and scratched. Her head tilted slightly, not unnaturally, but just enough to feel wrong. She stared down at me, wide-eyed and blank-faced, solid, tangible, real. "Who are you?" I stammered, each word trembling with the breath that carried it. She giggled, covering her mouth with one hand. The sound was shrill and broken, like static on a failing radio. "Why do you explore places you have no right exploring? Haven't you heard? Curiosity killed the cat." I froze. My blood turned to ice as recognition hit me like a tidal wave. You're Naomi Grant," I whispered. My voice was barely audible. My mind reeled back to the article I'd seen in the arcade. Her head tilted further, almost a full 90 degrees. It was inhuman. "Who?" she asked, her voice detached, almost amused. That's when I noticed something was wrong. Her mouth hadn't moved. The words echoed around me, but her lips remained still. I edged sideways, trying to put distance between us. My hand fumbled for my knife, but my fingers trembled too much to grasp it. Her expression shifted suddenly. She began to cry, loud and wailing, her glassy eyes wide and unblinking. "I want my mommy. Can you help me?" she sobbed, swiping at her face with hands that didn't quite connect with her skin. Her movements stuttered, as though reality itself were glitching. I just want to leave," I stammered, desperation thick in my voice. "I don't know where I am or who or what you are. I just want to leave." The crying stopped instantly. She tilted her head back upright, her unblinking eyes boring into mine with venomous intensity. "Don't you get it, Seth?" she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "You're not leaving. You're never going to leave." Her body collapsed like a rag doll, crumpling to the floor as though every bone inside her had vanished. The light around her flared in a blinding burst of white. I ran. There was no thinking, no planning, just pure animal instinct. My boots thundered against the stairs, echoing in the cavernous space. Behind me, heavy thuds reverberated in rhythmic bursts, growing louder with each passing second. The lights above shattered one by one, and the darkness rushed after me, swallowing each light in its path like a hungry void. I pushed harder, faster, until my chest burned and my legs screamed for relief. 5 flights, 10 flights. The thuds grew distant, then stopped entirely. I collapsed against the wall, my breath ragged and uneven, my body trembling as I tried to make sense of the nightmare unraveling around me. When I looked down, the stairs had changed again. The steps were jagged now, rusted metal that groaned faintly under my weight. The walls were cracked and sharp, their uneven edges scraping my fingertips. Thin veins of rust crept like spider webs, and the air was cold, stale, and wrong. I hesitated, staring down into the dark. This isn't possible. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear and regret. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. For a moment, my thoughts drifted to the revolver. Ending it all, escaping the madness, almost felt merciful. I clenched my teeth, shaking the thought off. "No," I muttered, forcing myself to stand. "You have to keep going." A scratching sound broke the silence. Slow, deliberate. It came from the wall beside me, the noise grating like nails dragged across metal. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as though something was clawing its way through the wall, desperate to reach me. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts spiraled as the noise intensified, rising to a pitch so sharp it pierced my ears. I stumbled backward, pressing my palms against my head, desperate to block it out. I crouched down, curling in on myself, the sound reverberating through my skull until I thought it might split me open. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed felt deafening. the absence of sound leaving a hollow ache in its place. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stayed there, frozen, too afraid to move. "Why did I come here?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My hand drifted into my pocket, fingers brushing against a coin I hadn't realized was there. A penny. Trembling, I leaned over the railing and let it fall. I strained to hear, hoping for the faint plink of it hitting something below, but the sound never came. The silence pressed down on me, heavier than before, wrapping around me like a vice. Clutching the rail, I forced my feet to move. One step, then another. My flashlight flickered, its weak beam slicing through the oppressive dark. Suddenly, my boots hit something solid. I stumbled, nearly falling forward. Blinking in disbelief, I realized the staircase was gone. A narrow tunnel stretched ahead of me. Its walls were painted with faded cartoon pine trees from the Evergreen Mall logo. Their wide grins twisted into something grotesque in the dim, unnatural light. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. Then I heard it. The sound came from above, faint at first but unmistakable. It was sharp, deliberate, like something with claws tapping against the stairs. A shiver raced down my spine. I turned to look back up the stairs. And that's when it hit me. The air. It was freezing. The cold seeped into my skin, spreading through my limbs. A bitter chill that made each breath sting. The noise grew louder, faster. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was pressure, an unbearable weight that settled on my shoulders like something there, unseen, was looming closer. I didn't wait to see what it was. My legs moved before I could think, carrying me into the tunnel. I stumbled forward, scrambling on all fours as the tunnel closed around me. The walls narrowed, pressing against my shoulders and knees with every frantic movement, deeper into the suffocating dark. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, another sound, scratching, scuttling. My flashlight beam caught movement ahead, and my stomach dropped. Rats. A swarm of them poured out of the shadows, their furless tails twitching, and their glowing eyes locking onto me. When I shone the light toward them, they hissed, a collective sickening noise that sent me into a full panic. They surged forward. I tried to scoot back, my mind screaming at me to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The rats climbed over my legs, their tiny claws scratching and tearing at my skin, their slick bodies brushing against me. I screamed, thrashing wildly, but they didn't stop. The sound returned, louder, sharper now, echoing through the tunnel behind me. I remembered what I had fled, and terror like I'd never felt before gripped me. I forced myself forward, shoving through the tide of rats. Their claws tore at my hands, but I kept moving. The scuttling grew louder, the squeaks more frantic, and then I hit something. My hands pressed against a solid surface. A dead end. "No, no, no," I screamed, pounding on the wall. It felt hollow beneath my fists. My fingers scrambled over the surface until they found it. A tiny doorknob, cold and smooth. Without thinking, I twisted it and shoved the door open, tumbling through and slamming it shut behind me. I collapsed onto the ground, trembling, my breath ragged and uneven. The air here was stale and heavy. Beneath me, the surface felt solid but coarse, like stone worn down over centuries. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, my palms brushing against cracked and jagged walls as if the structure had rotted away. The staircase had changed again. I was back on the steps, but this time, the only path was up. The steps were crumbling and jagged as if carved from ancient rock. The walls around me were cracked and veined, rotting like something long abandoned, upward. The faintest flicker of light mocked me from somewhere far above. That's when I broke. I collapsed against the wall, burying my face in my hands as tears streamed down my cheeks. The weight of the situation bore down on me, crushing any hope I had left. I was trapped here, forever. An earlier thought, unbidden and unwelcome, crept back into my mind, ending it all, escaping this nightmare once and for all. I thought about the revolver again. No, Seth, no, I whispered hoarsely to myself. The cool rock grounding me, the temptation to end it all lingered, a shadow in my mind. But I couldn't give in. Not yet. You have to keep going. You have to try, I told myself. Suddenly a sound broke through the oppressive silence, a loud, cheerful public service announcement. I froze, the incongruity of the noise striking me like a physical blow. A calm, robotic voice echoed through the air, smooth yet unnatural. Attention all Evergreen Mall shoppers. The mall is closing in 10 minutes. Please make your final purchases and proceed to the nearest exit. The announcement faded into static, leaving me dumbstruck. My eyes darted around, searching for speakers or any sign of its origin. There was nothing, no indication of where it had come from or how it had reached me here, in this impossible stairwell. My heart raced, but I took it as a sign. A cruel one, perhaps, but a sign nonetheless. I had to keep moving. The stairs above twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, spiraling at angles that made my head spin. They continued to transform as I ascended, growing narrower in places, forcing me to press against the walls and shuffle sideways, only to widen abruptly into impossibly broad steps that stretched into shadows beyond my flashlight's reach. It felt like the staircase was testing me, reshaping itself with every step. And then, without warning, the stairs ended. I nearly stumbled forward as my flashlight's beam caught it, a familiar sight that felt absurd in this nightmare. An escalator, ordinary, untouched. Its black rubber handrails gleamed, and the metal steps glided smoothly upward, humming faintly in the silence. Relief flickered through me. For once I wouldn't have to walk. I stepped onto the moving stairs, letting them carry me up as my mind wandered. How is any of this possible? What would Jake do? He'd always been the quick thinker, the one who could laugh in the face of fear. The memory of his voice echoed faintly in my head, a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. But my thoughts shattered as I neared the top. The last step jolted slightly, its panel rattling loose. Before I could react, a small hand shot out from the gap between the panel and the metal grate, latching onto my leg. I yelped, stumbling forward and hitting the ground. My flashlight tumbled from my grip, spinning and clattering noisily as its beam flickered wildly. I twisted to look behind me, and the blood drained from my face. A boy, no older than 10, was wedged into the escalator's gears where the panel had come loose. His small body was mangled, his limbs twisted and broken, as though the machinery had tried to swallow him whole. Metal teeth and wires pierced through his decaying skin, binding him to the mechanism like some grotesque marionette. His face was frozen in a look of anguish, mouth hanging slack and broken. And then he screamed. The sound tore through me, high-pitched, piercing, unnatural. It rattled in my skull, sharp as glass, and my vision swam with pain. I scrambled back, kicking desperately at the hand still clutching my leg. "Let go!" I shouted, my voice drowned out by the unrelenting scream. I kicked again, harder this time, but he grabbed my other leg, dragging me toward the jagged opening of the escalator. I clawed at the ground, searching for anything to anchor myself. My fingers found nothing but a smooth floor. The gun. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. I fumbled with my bag, struggling to block out the deafening scream as I pulled out the revolver. My hands shook violently as I aimed the barrel at the boy's head, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. I squeezed the trigger. The shot exploded in the confined space, reverberating through the stairwell. For a moment, everything went silent. My ears rang, the deafening blast leaving me momentarily disoriented. The boy's body jerked backward, his grip loosening as he crumpled into the machinery. The last step of the escalator slid back into place, smooth and pristine, as if nothing had ever been there. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall, my chest heaving as I stared at the spot where the boy had been. My hands trembled uncontrollably, the weight of what I had done crashing down on me. No, I muttered to myself, my voice cracking. No, I had to. It wasn't human. It wasn't a child. It wasn't real. The words felt hollow, an empty mantra to drown out the screaming guilt in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe and focus. When I opened them, the stairs were back, but different. Narrow, spiraling metal steps twisting endlessly upward, like the staircase of a lighthouse. Then I heard it, a sound on the other side of the wall. I froze, pressing my ear against the cold surface. It sounded like a family talking, laughing, eating dinner. The sound was so normal, so human, that it sparked a fragile hope within me. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I screamed, banging on the wall with both fists. "Please, help me. I'm stuck in here." The voices stopped. My heart sank. Then a man's voice, muffled but close, called out, "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my walls?" Relief washed over me. It didn't matter who he was. Just hearing another person felt like salvation. "I don't know where I am," I shouted back. "Please, I've been stuck here for hours, or days. I don't know, I just want to get out." "Look, buddy, I've got kids in here," the man said, his tone shifting to irritation. "You need to leave. I'm calling the cops." "No, you don't get it. I can't leave. Call the cops. Please, call them." Before he could respond, that same piercing cold returned. My skin frosted, my breath came out in shallow puffs, and I shivered uncontrollably. My eyes widened as the lights around me flickered erratically, dimming and surging as though the staircase itself was alive. I stumbled backward from the wall, realizing too late that I'd drawn the creature's attention. A faint, deliberate clicking echoed from the escalator below. The lights flickered, and I saw it. A massive, insect-like creature emerging onto the steps. Its long, jointed legs tapped against the metal, each movement deliberate and unnatural. Mandibles the size of my legs clicked in a sickening rhythm, a predator's signal before the kill. Then it hissed, a faint, wet sound like steam escaping through a crack in rotting flesh. "It's here," I whispered, pressing myself flat against the wall. My voice trembled. "Please hurry, it's right there." "What are you talking about?" the man on the other side of the wall demanded. "What's there?" But I couldn't answer. The creature's limbs shifted with a sickening crack, its elongated body moving in jerky, unnatural bursts. It paused, then surged closer, each movement blindingly fast. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled backward, clutching my flashlight like it could somehow protect me. "Please," I screamed at the wall. "Get help. It's coming for me." But the voices on the other side of the wall didn't respond. Instead, I heard a soft, distant chuckle, a child's giggle, light and airy. I froze, glancing back toward the wall. The man's voice returned, eerily calm now. "You shouldn't have come here, kid." I looked back at the creature, and I raised my revolver. My hand shook so violently I nearly dropped it, but I squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the narrow stairwell, deafening me momentarily. The creature flinched but didn't stop. It tilted its grotesque head, mandibles clicking faster now as though taunting me. I turned and ran, my boots slamming against the steps as I ascended blindly into the depths. The staircase twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, each step pulling me deeper into its impossible geometry. The clicking sound followed close behind, echoing louder and louder. Its long limbs scraped against the walls, its grotesque body skittering unnaturally as it closed the distance. My flashlight slipped from my grip as I stumbled, its beam spinning wildly across the walls. I scrambled to grab it, my fingers brushing the cold metal, when a sharp pain erupted in my leg. I screamed, twisting around to see one of its claws slicing through my jeans, pinning me in place. I fired again. The recoil jolted through my arm, and the creature reared back this time. Its clicking grew more frantic, its movements jerky and disjointed. I didn't waste another second. I wrenched my leg free and grabbed my flashlight, bolting up the stairs as fast as I could. Then the staircase ended. Just ended. I skidded to a stop, my boots scraping against the last step. Before me stretched a void of pure blackness. No floor, walls, or ceiling. Just an endless abyss that seemed to hum with its own suffocating silence. I turned back, raising my revolver on instinct, and froze. A sound echoed down the stairs. Laughter. Familiar, infectious laughter I hadn't heard in years. My grip on the gun faltered as tears pricked the edges of my vision. Jake? The silhouette rounded the corner, emerging from the shadows in a staggered, puppet-like walk. His grin stretched too wide. But God, his voice was exactly as I remembered it. This is quite the exploration, don't you say, Seth? He teased, light and casual, like we were 16 again, sneaking through warehouses with flashlights and bravado. I froze, my chest heaving, the revolver trembling in my hands. Jake? My voice cracked. No, you're not real. This is just another bloody trick. He laughed, a hollow wheezing sound that made the space feel smaller. He stumbled closer, his shoulder slamming into the wall, his head lolling at an impossible angle. You always were a scaredy cat, Seth, he slurred, his voice warping, dragging like a broken record. You stopped coming to see me, left me alone in the dark. Tears blurred my vision. Stop it! You're not him! His head twisted further, bones grinding with a sickening crack. You never cried for me, he sneered, hollow eyes locking onto mine. Not when you let me go. I couldn't move. His shattered hands reached for me, shoving me backward. I screamed as I tumbled into the void, the revolver slipping from my grip and spinning into darkness. Jake's twisted grin, his mangled face, was the last thing I saw before the blackness swallowed me whole. I was falling. I fell. No wind, no sound, just weightlessness. Jake's laughter echoed faintly, memories flickering like a broken film. Seconds blurred into something longer. Time itself seemed to unravel. And then I hit the ground. The impact should have killed me, but it didn't hurt. The ground beneath me was cold, solid. Gasping, I opened my eyes to the same smooth, pristine ceiling I'd seen at the start. The staircase stretched ahead, glowing yellow, untouched. I staggered to my feet, my chest tight, my mind reeling. The door back to Evergreen Mall stood ajar, just as I'd left it. Half expecting the walls to close in, I stumbled through, boots crunching broken glass as I sprinted for the exit. My car was still there, silent and waiting. I threw myself into the driver's seat, turned the key with shaking hands, and peeled out of the lot without looking back. When I got home, I sat in my car, forehead against the wheel, as the events replayed in my mind. The neighbor's dog barked faintly outside, grounding me back to reality. I dragged myself to my apartment, avoiding the stairs entirely. No more stairs, I promised myself, jabbing the elevator button. My cat, Mojo, greeted me with a soft meow inside my apartment. I collapsed to my knees, sinking my hand into his fur. The simple comfort nearly broke me. I fed him numbly, then staggered to my bed. Sleep claimed me the instant I hit the mattress. I don't know how long I was out when the cold woke me. A chill that didn't belong here that sank into my bones. I shot upright, my breath catching in my throat. The closet door was open. I knew it had been closed. My eyes flicked to the floor. The glow. A sickly yellow hue spilled across my bedroom, bleeding through an impossible opening. A shattered, bloody hand slid around the edge of the door. Then the top of a head appeared, dangling unnaturally, eyes gleaming from the shadows. My best friend's laughter broke the silence, broken and distorted. The first flight of stairs stretched into the dark, waiting for me to follow.